item. So I could do something like that. I can get rid of lines on items. So if I don't like that line there, I can just say lines equals none. And by the way, all this stuff, like my ability to put lines equals none, etc., we'll get into how to do this with stencil, but they're all just stencil components. So they just built them in the same way that we're going to build. All right, so we have a little save button. We can add our item, we click save, and then ideally it shows up here, right? So how do we do that? Well, one of the things that's nice about stencil and the way that it's written is that it's all really JavaScript, right? Like we're writing HTML here, but in the end, it's all JavaScript. This is just a string of HTML that's going to get appended onto our page. And this all works in the back end. You don't see it all here, but it's working exactly the same way that you guys were doing with jQuery. It's just some helper functions, right? So basically, it looks for render in the component, and it says, okay, I want to do a find my own element, like whatever this element is that got created. I want to find myself, and then I want to append the HTML of whatever's returned inside of this render function. It's just taking that string of HTML and dropping it in. Okay, so there's nothing, again, special here. This is doing exactly the same thing you guys have been doing with jQuery. But we can write, because it's JavaScript, we can write functions that return things. So one of the things that's very common is in this list view, what you really want to do is loop over, which you guys were doing before. You want to loop over your array to be able to create the items. So we can create another function. You can name it whatever you want. Generally, when you're writing something that's going to have HTML in the function returned, you name it render and then whatever you're going to render. But that's just a convention thing. You can actually name the function whatever you want. I'm going to name this render items. You also notice the syntax for functions is a little different. It's not quite as verbose as what you've been writing in JavaScript. This is just a TypeScript version of writing the function. It's just a little bit simpler. So now what I can do is I can say, let's take items. Right now I'll just declare an items array. Whatever you need to do. And then I'm going to loop over those. So we're going to return a map of our items. You guys know what the difference between map and for each is yet? You guys figured that out yet?
Map moves like your return is like what's in the new array.
Yeah.
And then for each just does that on each array.
Yeah. So for each just executes a set of code. And map, whatever you return, actually replaces whatever that item was in the array with the new thing. Okay, so in our case, we want to replace go to store with an item that has a label of go to store. Okay, so because we're trying to replace something, we use a map. If you were just trying to execute some code against something, you would do a for each. That's the difference. So map, you replace the item. For each, you just do something with it. So you can use maps as for eaches and just not return anything. That's fine. It's just you can't use a for each as a map. Like one is, you can use one for one thing, but you can't use the other for the other thing. So map, if you're trying to replace things that are in the array, you want to use a map. So in our case, again, we're trying to replace go to store with ion item, ion label, go to store. So the way we're going to do that, so we're going to return, and you can return either arrays when you're doing this HTML stuff, or you can return something inside of parentheses like this. We'll go through what the difference is. In general, your best practice, the easiest thing to do is to always return an array. So we're going to return an array whose first item is item, ion label, go to store. We can replace go to store here though with, what do we want to replace this with? Item. The syntax for that is just curly braces. So this is interpolation happening at the stencil level. So whenever you're writing something inside of HTML, you still have regular interpolation like we do in JavaScript when you're working with strings. But when you're inside of HTML, the interpolation is done with curly braces without the dollar sign. So then, given that piece of information, knowing how interpolation works inside of HTML, what do I want to put here?
Are you gonna first you want to loop through, right?
So we are looping through it. Right, we're looping through items here.
When you render.
With a call render item.
We want to call render items. Wait, you see? So here we want to call render items because we want to replace right here with what's returned from the render items. So to do that, anything that's inside of your class that's written in this way, we're creating instance methods, just like we did in Rails a little while ago. So you reference everything that's outside of your own function that's inside of the class with this. Okay, so we're just going to say this dot render items. And it.
And it makes phone calls.
And it makes phone calls. I wrote a stencil item that makes phone calls yesterday. All right, so relatively straightforward, I hope, what's happening here so far. This shouldn't be too crazy, probably. We're going to move on to talking a little bit more advanced things that you can do with stencil. This is like, it's a mind shift, certainly, right? Like you are changing your perspective on how you do this stuff. But again, remember, it's just that somebody wrote a framework that's doing the stuff that you've been doing with jQuery and JavaScript. It's just making it a little bit easier and nicer for you to be able to do. There's some shortcuts, right? So render, again, is just going to do a dot append to whatever the name of the element is. So what this is really doing in the back end, right, is we're adding a new class to the project. So when all that JavaScript gets compiled up, it's saying, I want you to look for any HTML element that is app-to-do-list. And when you find it, I want you to apply the render function to it. So this render function says return this set of HTML, which is then saying, okay, I want you to do a dot append HTML to any element that has app-to-do-list. And then when it runs through this render, it actually has a couple of other functions that it ends up calling, right? But there's nothing particularly special that's happening here. In the back end, it's still doing the same stuff you guys were doing with jQuery and with JavaScript. This makes it a little bit easier to do it. All right.
Can you just touch on the this scope a little?
Yeah, so this is always a reference to, this is always a reference to your instance. So we're inside of a class, just like we were inside of a class when we were doing the Rails stuff. And so this is always a reference to something else that's in your class. It's an instance method. And they're all almost always going to be instance methods. If it's not an instance method, then it's static. But you're probably not going to get into this. Maybe not at all, ever. But not for a while. Okay, but most of the time it's going to be like that. You can also declare instance variables. And the way that you do that is simply by declaring them at the top of the file. So we could do something like okay. You can make them public or private or protected, which are things that we haven't talked much about yet. We'll get into a little bit later, but by default it's public, and which just means it's openly accessible, so you can just use it all over the place. You don't have to worry about what it means. So we can then like put that anywhere we want to. So we can say this dot hello, or we could, like when we call render items, we could say this dot hello equals goodbye. And this is a useful code reading exercise to do. So who can tell me what we're going to end up with if we run this code? What's going to show up on the page?
Well, actually, it would be 11 because you haven't called it.
Yeah. So we're going to remember again. The first thing we call is render. So it's going to go here. It's going to say, okay, create an ion card, create an ion card content. Give me this dot hello. What is this dot hello right now?
Yeah.
It's hello. Then I'm going to call render items. Then after render items, maybe I do this dot hello again. What's this hello going to be?
Goodbye.
This one's going to be goodbye. Because we called render items, and render items, we changed the instance variable. So just like we did with that Rails code a few days ago, where when it doesn't change until you call the function that makes the change to it, but it then is available everywhere as the new thing, that's what would happen here. Okay. So Well, I guess I can actually prove things to you guys. So there's hello, there's goodbye. And again, like you can try this stuff out too, right? Like you can learn along the way. You just make a couple changes and see what happens. You can end up with so TypeScript is much stricter than JavaScript is. You should generally get red lines that tell you why there's a problem with what you're doing. We'll walk through those things together as they come up. But you'll generally also get errors if you do something weird, like if you do that, right? I've declared an instance variable called hell, but that does. So when I call hello later, it says property hello does not exist on the app to-do list item. Did you mean hell? So it even tries to help you out right there, right? And we get these red lines over here that tell us what's going on. So then I can change wherever. I can either change it here, or I could have changed hell back to hello. Okay. You can also oftentimes, depending on what the problem is, so let's see, how can I make a problem? Do something. It's not as strictly set up as what I normally have in a project. Sometimes when there's a problem, you can press Option Enter. You can always press that, and it'll give you some options on like what you want to do here. But if things are wrong, like this, it doesn't have it. Sometimes, depending on what the problem is, it'll actually just say fix this issue or fix all issues in the file, and you can just click on that and it'll just fix it for you. So I have stricter rules that are like you can only have so many spaces. You can't have extra spaces at the end of the line, or you can't have extra spaces between functions, or whatever the case may be. So in some of my other projects, like if I did something like that, red lines would show up here, and you can just press Option Enter. It would say fix all the issues in the file, and you click on it, and it just moves everything. Just fix it for you, just free format stuff. It's nice. Yeah. I don't know what I did wrong, but if you could just fix a computer, that'd be great. All right. So you also have some nice helper functions. So in jQuery, we had to do like find the element and then add an event listener for click, and then when that event happens, then I want to do a thing. In frameworks like this, and all these frameworks do this, so Angular, React, etc., they give you some nice helper functions generally in the HTML that you can call instead. So what we can do now is we can say on click, and it does these curly braces because it's going to evaluate. We saw this already, right? We're using it right here. It's going to evaluate whatever we put inside of there. So we can put some code in here. So we can say on click, I want to call this dot save. Which I don't have a save function, so it's yelling at me about that. If I go over, it'll tell you that. Property save doesn't exist on to-do list item. So we're going to create a save function. Right now, we're just going to console log out save. So now, every time I click on that button, it's going to call this .save, which is just going to log out save. See? It's really nice. There's a lot less code. It's a lot more intuitive. You're like writing the on-click into the actual thing, etc. There's several of these, and as you go through the Ionic docs, you'll see many of them. So each one of these, like Ion button, has an on-click property. Go look at that. How I knew that existed. So if you go to like Ion button, oh, it actually doesn't show it. Well, that's unfortunate. It does. It just is not documented.
I guess the server.
Yeah, it's a problem with documentation in general, right? Like there are things that get missed in the documentation that actually exist in the code.
like the number one thing for a button.
Yeah. But it's not though, actually, because a lot of what they're talking about is styling, and a lot of people do know that are using this, right? That OnClick exists there. Let me see if I look
It
at
has
like.
an event section. Maybe. What else is an event?
So events is a little different. We'll get into those later. But events, ion blur and ion focus. You can add a listener that says whenever I see an ion blur and ion focus happen, then execute some other function. But it's a little different because you can't put an ion blur. You can't do like that. What you would do, and this is way more advanced stuff, but just so you can see that it's a different thing, is an @listen, which is a thing that's provided by Stencil. You see here, we're going to import it from Stencil Core.
Yeah.
Ion blur.
You normally have to do the import at the top, right?
Yeah, which it does automatically because I chose it. Which is a little weird, but what it's doing is it's saying whenever I'm listening for an ion blur event to happen, and what Ionic is telling you is that when you blur off of the button, so when you like move your mouse off of the button, I'm going to trigger a ion blur event that you can listen for. So we're listening. So that becomes a little more difficult actually. So you get an event just like you do for other things. And that event has several pieces of data on it, some of which you can use to figure out who sent it, including the event target, like we've used in jQuery. So if you named your button, like if you put a name or an ID or something on your button, you could say event.target.name or event.target.id, and then you'd know that the blur came from that thing. But yeah, otherwise there could be 50 buttons that do an ion blur, and you need to know which one did the ion blur. You're listening generally for ion blur, and then you have to take the event and figure out what you want to do with it. Does that make sense?
Yes. So you're not tying the event listener to any specific. You have an event listener that listens across the app for the event.
Yep.
And once it happens, then you figure out.
Mm-hmm. They've added a new thing which I haven't played around with much. This came out in the most recent version. There's a target that you can add here. There's a list of options, one of which is target. And I think you could do something like name like that. And if I had an ID of my button on that button, then it would just do it for that button. But you can also just do it with a guard clause. You could say if it doesn't equal my button, then return. In other words, don't do the console log unless.
So the syntax of that function @listen, or something and @listen connected, just because there's no line break or no space in between.
Yeah, you can actually put spaces, but it's because it's the next thing. So this is real new stuff. So I didn't intend to get into this. It's just we ended up on sort of a tangent, but I can go through it quickly. So the @listen, just like the @component up here, are what are known as decorators. These are JavaScript functionality. This is JavaScript functionality that has really only existed for like the last 2 years. And TypeScript has its own version of it, which extends it even further and makes it a little bit nicer to use. So anything that you see an @ symbol before that's a function is known as a decorator. What they do is they apply themselves. There's a set of code behind that decorator that's getting applied to whatever comes next in your set of code. So the @component decorator here is applying things like I want to have a render function, right? So this render function exists because there's an @component being associated to this app to-do list class because it's the next thing in the code. Similarly, @listen is getting applied to this function because it's the next thing that exists in the code. So if I moved @listen to here, now it's applying to save.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So render is applying to app component because it has an app to do list tag in it.
So app component is getting applied to the class of app to do list because export class app to do list is the thing that comes right after that component. So what it's saying is I have a tag of app to do list. So anywhere you see an HTML element that's app-to-do-list, I want you to apply the render function from the class that follows me. That's the simplest way of talking about what's happening there. Okay. All right. So back to what we were walking through though. So we have this save function. It's going to get called every time we click on save. All right. So that's one piece of the puzzle. Now what we want to save is the thing that's inside of Ion input. You could do this in a variety of different ways. The easiest one probably is to put a value here that is associated with another one of our public variables. So you could say like new item. So this is another thing with the TypeScript stuff. It really wants you to declare what type of variable you're using. So in our case, we want a new item that's going to be a string. So you do colon string. It's much closer to Java. Java people are probably at home in this. Okay. You can, if you're not sure what that is or what's supposed to happen there, and it's complaining about it, you can do any. And then it's back to normal JavaScript stuff. Yeah. And he's dying inside, but because there are benefits of, so if you do string and then you try to make it an object, it's going to yell at you and say you can't do that. Like RubyMine is going to yell at you and say you can't do that. So there's benefit to it. So there's just like the data types we talked about before. There's string, there's arrays, there's objects, there's booleans, right? And so you can put those things here and use them. The reason why we didn't have to do it for hello is because we are explicitly setting it equal to a string, so it knows that this thing is supposed to be a string from this point on, unless I do something to tell it that it can be a string or something else. So you could do something like string or boolean, and then set it equal to hello. So now hello can be a string or a boolean. So all kinds of crazy things there. But, all right. Hello, new item. We're going to set our input value to be this.new item. Okay, so right now it's going to be blank. So we don't get any compilation errors. So now let's go ahead and actually, let's just set it equal to something. Let's just say item. You can see like we get, it starts off with new item because we set it that way. There we go. All right, so we got new item there, right? Now I can console log out new item. When we go to save, so we can get some idea. So it's this dot, right? New item is instance variable. Sometimes you get in a bad state because I was saving too quickly, and so it still has the old version. Usually all you have to do is like create an enter, like a new line, save it again. And it goes back to the fix. So, all right, so if I click save, new item is not found. No. Oh, it still has the old. It might be a syntax error that I'm missing. If you go back to your terminal, you should be able to see this. Sometimes it's just a bad state. It just restart the server. So while it's building, it's in this orange state, then it'll go black. There we go. So I was just in a bad state from missaving and broken stuff. But now when I click save, I can see it's new item. So if I change this, if I say like go to pet store, and I click save, what's going to happen? Except it doesn't. It's still a new item. Because we haven't applied, there's a special decorator for things that you expect to change that way when you want it to change in the form or throughout the course of interacting with your component. And it's just at state.
Yeah, but it wasn't console logging. Embedding.
It was.
Oh, it was?
Yeah, it's just saying new item every time. So here, I'll put it back to prove it to you.
Wait, no.
So now it's mad. See, it says state is declared, but it's never used. A lot of the times, the error messages that you're getting here when they look like this are the same errors you're actually getting in RubyMine. It's just you haven't fixed it yet. So this one then showing you right here, like I'm not actually using state, so why are you importing it? Okay. If I click save, right? If I change it, it still says new item.
Yeah, but why? I'm surprised it didn't. Because you're changing just the variable, and you're just printing the variable. Why does that not change?
Because it's not. Because all it's doing is saying, as it is right now, and it's a variable.
You can't mutate the variable?
You can't mutate the variable from the HTML back to the. So you can mutate the variable in here, which we do with hello. Right. So inside of your JavaScript function, you can totally mutate the variable, right? And so we could even totally create, like as part of our on-click event, we could do something like this dot new item, because we can actually send the same JavaScript event that you guys are used to working with. I could do event.parent.find the thing.value, right? Like we used to do in JavaScript. We could do that. But I have to do it in the JavaScript as a part of the thing. There's a convenience method for this, a convenience decorator, that allows me to not have to write all of that code, and that's called state. And what happens with state decorated variables is that anytime they change, whether in the JavaScript code or in the HTML, the HTML will get re-rendered, or at least the part of the HTML that changes is going to get re-rendered on the page for you. And it means that when you change things inside of the HTML, it gets sent back up into the JavaScript. So it's like that event that we were writing manually before, where we'd say event.find the thing that has the ID of whatever. I want you to set this variable back to whatever that value is. Now it's going to happen automatically. So if I do this, oh, shoot, missed something. Save, click, value, item.
You still
Yeah.
I thought it just, from what I had seen, I thought it just re-renders.
It does just re-render.
But it
You still have to send the information to it. Yeah. So here's a couple different ways of dealing with this. One is that you can put an on input into this box. Which is probably the easiest way, and then you can do an event value changed, and I can create another one. It's just like value changed, and then we can here just do this dot new item equals event dot target value, and so this should happen every time.
I think it's past the event.
Yeah. So this should happen every time that we change anything. If we type a key or whatever, so on every key press, we're going to get an event triggering that's going to call this function, which is going to update new item. So then when we go to call save, new item will be updated to what we want it to be. Just make sure that's true. So there we get to the event. Value is new items. So we're going to be setting this new item to new items. So now when we click save, it says new items. So you have the
Does it
two.
now render every time you press a button?
It's re-rendering, but only the portion that's changing.
Oh, so it's like
It's smart. Yeah. So React introduced this concept where it looks for this exact same type of thing. They even call it state. It's looking for changes to the HTML that are different. It looks for the diff, and only where there's a difference does it actually replace the HTML. So it doesn't look like, you don't get a bunch of flickering, you don't get a full page reload, it just changes the piece that's changing, so you don't actually see much happen.
So even here, it won't even, since you don't really use new item, it won't even, it'll render, but it won't do anything.
Correct. Yep. Nothing's actually changing at all. That's right. But what we could do, so let's move items. We're going to make that a new state variable as well, because when items changes, we're going to want it to actually change what the page looks like. Yeah, so in fact, like, we don't even need this to be a state at all, because it's not actually changing anything. It's going to happen when we change items. Okay. So we set up items like this, and then that means that now, what do I need to put here to make it work? I can't use items anymore, right? I have to use how do I reference items?
Oh, this item.
Yeah, this item. All right, so just to go back to make sure that things are still working the way that they're supposed to, everything's still there. Right. When I click the save button, what do I want to do?
You want to add the new item onto items.
I want to add the new item onto items. So how do I do that?
Before you used to do push, but after reading some of the documentation, you realize you can't just do that.
You can't just do push. So let's just go through that exercise for a second, though. So normally what you would have done is a this.items.push, and then what you're going to end up with is items, and at the end of that is going to be whatever the value of new item is. Okay. The problem with this is that it doesn't look to JavaScript like there's been a change, even though there has been. When you do the push, the signature that it's looking at, it remains the same. So what you have to return is a copy of it. Okay. Because when you return the copy of it, the signature looks different because it's not exactly the same. It's a copy of what it was originally. A new reference. Yeah, that's right. A new reference. So the way that you do that, there is some nice new JavaScript syntax that allows you to do this. You can do square brackets dot 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 this dot items comma this dot new item. Okay, and what that's doing is saying take a copy of, so that's what the dot 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 is, of the items array that already exists, and then add to it new item. Okay. And it's reset items now to the copy plus the new thing, and so what should happen is we should actually see an update to change it. You do the same thing with objects. You have to make a copy and set the object. There we go. Okay. So there we go, right? Like that's really nice to create a to-do list item with much cleaner code than what you guys have been writing, right? Like this is, I mean, outside of the HTML, we have, what is that? 8 lines of code, right? Outside of the setup in the HTML, it's 8 lines of code to make this to-do list work. And it's much prettier too because we have the nice Ionic stuff to help us out. And there's some really nice things in the Ionic stuff. Like we went through the very basic stuff, but one of the things that could be cool for you guys to work with in particular is item options. So I think if you look at item sliding, let's see where they have an example of one of these. Let's see if I can go back to.
Change the order.
You can do that. So there is a way of doing that. That's not the ion item, so that's called some ion draggable or something. But this is like, well, this might have one. Maybe they don't have, somewhere in here they probably do have a pretty version where you can look at it, but you also get a whole list of icons that you can use, which is fun. But I can actually show you. It's this thing. the ability to
Yeah.
pull and get a different set of things. That is what item sliding is.
It's good for mobile.
So it's really good for mobile. Yeah. So like your trash can that you have, right? You can do it as a sliding and then hit the button. You do also have icons. Icons are really easy to use, so I can show you one of those quickly. So like we might want to have a button. Actually, you're probably going to want to have buttons, one for edit, one for trash. Button, icon, name equals, and then you just go find the name. And on icons, so like trash, your trash thing, name's trash, so it says right there, ion icon name equals trash. And then you probably want another one for edit. Let's see if we can find an edit something. So that one looks pretty good. Create, that's all. Okay, now this is ugly, right? And we talked about how you can do some things where you can put it to the beginning to make it a little bit nicer. You can also, that slot equals end thing applies here. Look at that. Super simple. You don't have to do crazy things. It keeps it centered. And also, you get nice things here. You see this is like too long of an item. We're running out of space.
Yeah.
So it just auto-ellipses it for you, which is nice. And now you can make it so that when you click on these buttons, various things happen, and you got a nice to-do list.
When you, so if you go into the console, your developer console, and you do the, I don't know what the button's called, but the thing where you just make it pop up as if it's on a phone or whatever.
This. Yeah.
So like slide obviously doesn't really necessarily work on like a PC, right?
I mean, it does. Like,
not in the same swipey way necessarily.
well, I mean, it does, but it's like when I was doing it, when I was here, like this is desktop mode. Like if things on the desktop. I don't know what the bug is with the mobile popping up, but like I am just grabbing and sliding it,
Okay.
right? So it does technically work, but you're not used to that experience necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, so like if I swipe on my phone, I'm not. Well, I guess I'm clicking, but it's. If
So
you
it's
do
a
it,
drag.
if you do it in the console, is you just like click and you're dragging it over. It's like as if you're touching it, right?
Yep, it
Okay.
is. They actually work the exact same way. So there's a drag event in the desktop as well. It's just not. It's just a less common user experience. We just don't do that often for desktop because you have more space, so you just put the button there. You don't have to hide the button behind the thing.
Yeah.
That's really the only. But yeah, like if I go into here. Let's see.
This is for like in 3 weeks when I finally put together.
Mastered all the other
when you
things.
put together in
Yeah.
the last 20 minutes.
Yep. Yeah, so I mean, we can even, let's just go ahead and just take time. I'll put the whole thing together and then you guys will have a reference. Let's just do the edit and the delete functionality here. So we'll just start with delete. What do you think I need to do to get a delete to happen?
The button needs to call the function.
Which button?
The one with the icon trash.
Yeah. So what do I need to put here? All right, and then somebody else, what do I need to put here? Yep, so we could put event. Oh, jeez. And then what do I put here?
The name of your function.
Yeah, the name of the function you want to call, right? So this dot destroy or something. Remember, delete is a keyword in JavaScript, so you can't do that. We're actually not going to need the event. You could pass the event through, just like we did with value change. We're just not going to need it. So then up here, I need to do what?
Write your delete or destroy function.
Yep, so we need a destroy function. And then what's it going to do?
So remove the element.
from the list.
Yep. So how do I do that?
Put a debugger in there and find out once you click the button.
Yeah, we could do that. So here's step number 1. We're going to want to pass the item, whatever it is, into our function,
Okay.
right? Because if we call destroy right now, we don't have anything. We don't have any reference to anything. But we can pass this item in to our function right here. So now at least I know what the item is.
This confused me.
See, so that's go to store, that's cancel subscription, go to store, cancel subscription, right? All right, so the next step is I want to be able to find where that item exists, and then I want to delete it. And you can do this with JavaScript code. It's just kind of ugly. You search, you search,
Parent node.
the index of, you find the thing, and then you do a splice -1 to remove it out of the array. So we could do it that way, or you can just search for underscore is really nice. So underscore
Yeah, so like how would you bring that into your project?
would do that. Yep. Underscore replace item in array. Search for it. Obviously done this times. And I believe all we want to do is
How would you just remove it?
yeah, that one's in the opposite direction. But here, so first thing we need to get underscore because it's gonna make our lives a little easier. Where you get underscore is you do npm install -s underscore, just like we got jQuery into our. Right. Now, underscore is not quite as nice as some other libraries that do appropriate imports that sort of look like this, where you're getting a TypeScript class that you can play with. But you can just import underscore from underscore. And that just looks for the package.json. So if I look at my package.json, I now have a new dependency called underscore. So it looks for underscore, which is in our node modules, is underscore, and then it's going to bring in whatever it returns. And what underscore happens to return is an underscore, literally. Okay. So we can now use that in our code. So I can say index equals underscore dot index of, I think it is. And then we're going to pass in our array as the first item, and then the item is the second item. That's going to give us back the index that we want to remove. And then we're going to say this dot items. Because we have to have that dereference copy all the time, one of the things I like to do is just create a copy whenever I start manipulating it. So we just say constant copy equals create a copy of it with that ... thing. And then we're going to just mess around with the copy until we're ready to set it back to items. So copy, so that's the index. And then we're going to say delete copy index. It should remove the one that we want to remove. And then we're going to set this dot items equal to copy. We can even do a copy of a copy just to make sure. Okay, so we'll walk through this whole thing in just a second, but yeah, we got real screwed up, huh? It's probably because I imported underscore and the served thing doesn't know what's going on. Real mad. It could be, this probably doesn't have, copy this from no, it should have module resolution. Okay. I didn't accidentally delete something, right? No, I don't know. Something weird happened. Restart a few times, you're back, ready to go. Alright, so now, though,
According to what I saw online, the delete thing creates a hole.
oh, it creates a hole. It doesn't actually delete it
Just
too.
makes it undefined.
Yeah. Do you remember what the... Do I have to do the splice thing? I thought I could... Oh, you know what? I bet underscore has a delete.
Sure, that's the first thing.
You know what we could probably just do? The without. So you see without is a thing they give you that just says take in an array, replace anything that I give you as a second array. So we can just say
This is the value to it. Where's that index?
it's the value. So we can just say
Copy.
items equals copy, comma, item. Oh, deleted the copy too.
How do you delete
Boom,
values?
boom. Command delete. So you set it. Just wherever your cursor happens to be. Alright, so then that's it. So now we are copying it, we're destroying it. It's beautiful. So we're going to add things, save them, delete them. Right? And then if we want to edit something, we do this in a bunch of different ways. So we could have something like, maybe the easiest way to do this is for each individual item, we turn it into an object, and then we have a being edited flag and a value. And then what we display is the value, and then we use the being edited to determine whether we should show one type of item or another type of item. Another way to do this is we could create a component that is the item in one context, and then we can switch state back and forth to be able to show the item in the edited state or not in the edited state, which is a nice little... So like we create a new component called app-to-do-list-item. Let's copy it right here. Remember, our tag has to change. Probably want to update our class name. And then this gets fun because now we're going to start to get into properties. So we can do an @prop. Which is another one of these decorators like state. What this is saying is this is an attribute that you can apply to me when you're using me in HTML that I'll then have reference to. So we can make this item and expect it to just be a string. And because I copied this, we have a whole bunch of stuff that we're not using at the moment. So I'm just going to remove those things. And then here, what we're really trying to do is replicate what's happening here. Okay, so there's all this code here. What we're going to do here is we're just going to reference this.item. We'll get back to the destroying bit. So now if I go back to my list, instead of having all of that stuff there, I can just do app-do-list-item, and it takes an item attribute, because we created that as our prop, equal to item. So nothing really changed all that much. And we just moved each one of these into its own component because it's a little bit easier to work in a smaller subset. Where our code was getting pretty big, and this is a place where we're going to have a little bit of complexity, so we'll just make it its own thing. All right. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can deal with the items getting destroyed. So the creation still works great the way that we have it set up. The destroying doesn't work because I had to remove that delete button because the destroy function didn't exist here. And part of the reason I did that is when we're inside of this component, we're scoped, we're isolated, right? I don't have reference. Yeah, we're loosely coupled. That's right. That's right. So I don't have reference to my higher level components information. So that this dot items that we're using to delete things from, I don't have reference to that here. Even if I pass it in as a property, it doesn't go back and forth. It would be one way. So I could get the copy of this dot items into my list, but if I destroyed things from it, it wouldn't delete it on the higher level. Okay. So what I need to do is I need to emit an event up to the higher level so that it can do something when I click on that delete button. So the way that you do that is with an event. And again, this is a nice little stencil thing that they give you. It's called event. You just name it whatever you want it to. So like item deleted. And it's the type is event emitter. And all this is in the stencil docs as you read through it. So I know this is a lot of stuff fast. I'm trying to get you a full, complete thing. But you can always go back and read the actual docs to see how this all comes together. All right. So now we have this event. What we can say is, let's put back that destroy event. So on click equals okay. So we're going to create a destroy event, or destroy function rather. And what we're going to do is we're going to say whenever this gets called, I want to emit that the item was deleted. So I'm going to say this dot item deleted dot emit, and I'm going to send the item that's getting deleted. Now this is all kinds of beautiful stuff happening behind the scenes, but what's going to happen is whenever an item is deleted, I'm going to emit an event called item deleted up my DOM to anybody who's listening, and the first thing that's up my DOM is the to-do list. So what I can do then is I can actually put a listener, just like we were listening before, and I can say listen for item deleted. And that's just because that's what I named my event emitter. You can actually change that. If you look, there's like options that allow you to rename it to be something else, but by default it names it whatever you name the event emitter. So now what that's going to do is give me an event, and we'll look at that event to figure out what we actually need to do. It's going to yell at me for not using event, so I'm just going to log it out. Okay. Yeah. Because there's no item yet. So we need to make item be something. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Which is kind of nice. For these types of things where you're trying to figure things out, it gets a little annoying, but it's nice when you're going to production. All right, so if I click this button, should make sure I get to here. So we should expect that when I click on it, I get to here. And then deleted. So it doesn't think. So can you guess what I did wrong here?
Oh, you didn't make destroy. You didn't give it a. Oh, no, but it was.
You have to put it on the.
You have to put it on the button.
Yeah, you got that.
I'll put it on the icon. That's all that is. Which goes to show like the icon doesn't have an on-click event, but buttons do. So there we go. So we got to our destroy function. This is inside of our app list item class. And now I'm going to emit the item up. So now we're here. So we got to the destroy event on the higher level app to-do list. The event has information that we can use. In particular, it has detail. Detail is whatever I put into that emit function as a parameter. Okay, so in our case, it's the item itself. So that tells me what I can do here. What should item be?
Event.detail.
Event.detail. Or because it's kind of silly, just rename it. Right, so now we're back. Got our delete functionality back. So now we're back to the same state that we were before. Now when we want to do edit,